And so my first question, of course, what's your background? Can you introduce yourself a bit? And of course, how did you end up working in CRO?
Of course. So I'm Italian, and I started working in Paddy Power Betfair in the e-gaming team, basically. What we were doing was like bonuses, slots, and I was managing a lot of the database queries, promotions, calculation, this kind of stuff. But I always had a passion for UI, UX, coding. I developed some apps on Android as well. So I had this opportunity to move to Dublin and joining their CRO team, basically. It was like a small team, but it was definitely quite interesting for me. So I decided to take the leap, and I moved to Dublin from Rome. I worked there for like 1 year, and then I moved to London in the Betfair office, and I kept doing CRO, basically. And then I basically decided to move to iTech, and I've been there for like 2 years, managing their end-to-end process, basically, for optimization.
Okay.
And now I manage a team of 5 that are doing basically optimization the whole day.
Okay. And so what did you learn from the gambling industry? I think that's a quite interesting, also socially, the social interaction there and how people interact.
I definitely learned a lot. It was actually a very good experience because the Italian business was set up as a startup. So I get basically to learn from insights team. I'm an engineer, I study engineering. So there was a lot of nice like insights based on like, you can imagine how much data you can collect in like a bookmaker. All the spins, all the interaction with the games, all the promotions, marketing. There was like multiple channels. So it was like full of data. And for a person like me, that was like insane. I really loved it.
Yeah.
But I always wanted to make changes to the product. You know, when you're there, you see, oh, actually, we could do this differently. And I had no power to have an impact on that. This is why then moving into a CRO position, it was like a dream come true, because then I could start influencing roadmaps or start to prove that actually we might have a better user experience, and that will lead to better results or better conversion rates or more revenue, basically.
Yeah, I also always found it interesting. I used to visit Magento conferences in Vegas, and being in those kinds of area where there's a lot of gambling, it's always really interesting how they also pay a lot of attention to how the building is set up. That there's really hard to find an exit, for example.
Yeah.
How they arrange all the gambling machines to maximize.
And I think actually you're right. The biggest learning that was very important at the start of my career was to start thinking about the psychology of the customer. And you need to really think with their brain or see things with their eyes, because sometimes you might want to make a change that actually just looks better, but it's not functional for the way they interpret gambling. And you have no idea how many tests in the beginning I was actually failing just because of that. But then when you start tweaking your mindset and you start actually becoming closer to the user, is there when you start seeing like winners, or you start seeing like shifting the needle in terms of metrics.
Yeah. So and now at iTech, you have a team of 5. So how does CRO at iTech, what does it look like?
Yes. So basically, I decided to move to iTech because iTech is a heavily CRO-focused company. Basically, when I joined iTech, there was a smaller team. The company was smaller because it's a young company and it's still growing. And we were working as, I would say, like a typical setup. I'm not going to get lost too much in the jargon, but basically, we had a team that was responsible for A/B testing. And every request or every test that was supposed to be run in the company was our remit, basically. And then as the company grows, as the products grow, then you start feeling the need for a change, a structural change. And this is why we moved from, I would say, like a centralized center of excellence, just because we used to be the go-to people in the business for every change in the product, or we used to act more like as a consultant sometimes, with product managers or other people in the business just asking for feedback, or they wanted to get an idea implemented, and we were basically just helping them. So we moved from this type of setup to an agile type of setup. So we inspired ourselves a bit to the Spotify model, even though it's not copy and paste, because that will definitely not work. And now we have experimentation chapters embedded in each of the squads that we have within the company. So it's a big change, and it's still ongoing. the idea is to get probably by the next year into an hybrid model where we're going to have a center of excellence, so people with high expertise in conversion rate optimization, and the entire company, so each other chapter, doing their experiments, and we just support them as consultants. So this is more or less the idea. So at the moment, I would say halfway through.
A lot of companies, you say, work with a centralized
structure,
team of experts that are the go-to for everything surrounding the experiments. So why do most companies end up doing that, you think?
Well, the centralized structure is very effective, especially when you are like a small company. You basically have everything you need within the same team. Communication is great by default because it's a small team and you always basically are next to each other the whole day, which is great from a CRO point of view. But then as soon as you start growing, you lose contact with product because then teams start to grow. So this shift, I would say, is almost necessary most of the times from my experience. Just because you need to be closer to the product, which means to be closer to the user, which means to be closer to the end goal, which is improving metrics.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my take. There are pros and cons as in everything. What I can tell you is that you lose a bit of pace when you migrate to a decentralized structure, because an idea that we would build or design in, I don't know, say a week, it might take 2 or 3 weeks now because you start having sprints because of the agile framework, because you start having 4 or 5 different chapters involved in the process, and every step you add into the workflow is obviously slowing you down. On the other end, quality usually goes up and there's a bit more structure in what you do. So you end up with, I would say, less. What happens when you have like a centralized structure sometimes is that you start pushing stuff to the side, and each time you use maybe different designers, so the design is not consistent, or the coding standards or guidelines are different because you use several contractors. When you move into a decentralized structure, it's way more consistent, so it's more future-proof in that sense.
Okay, so but that, I guess that depends also on how you are decentralized. If you're a centralized model and you have that designer in-house in that small centralized team, then that can be fine.
Yes, but it's true. But the only obviously depends on the company where you are and the setup. But I guess if you have a product team and then you have a decentralized CRO team, inconsistencies might still happen, because if you in a decentralized team, even if you have a designer, there might be other 2 or 3 designers working in, say, in an agile way in the product team, and there might be, lack of communication in that sense. So this might still lead to differences in, I don't know, like the brand guidelines that they use or assets, or it might actually duplicate the work as well. It's not effective in that sense or efficient.
Yeah, but then if you decentralize it, more and more people get involved. I would expect communication to become harder and consistency to become harder.
It is. I mean, consistency, to me, in my experience, obviously, this all depends on the company. I think consistency for us went better, way better, I would say. Even like the QA in general is a bit easier. But the process itself gets slower because the communication gets slower because there's more people involved.
Okay. And so if you go to a new company asks you guys to come in and work with them, do you always advise them to go for decentralized model or the Spotify model, or does it also depend on the company?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's not like the best model. It depends on the level of maturity, first of all, in the CRO program. Okay. It depends on the type of expertise that you have in the business. Usually, if you want to get low-hanging fruits and you want to be as quick as you can to push changes live and test stuff, probably the centralized model is the quickest way to achieve the result. If you then start working in a bit more structured way and there's a lot of stakeholders involved, probably with the decentralized type of structure, it might be helpful to achieve better results.
Okay. And so, and can you also tell us something about the type of company? You say the maturity of the company. So how do you guys measure that maturity? How do you go in and decide if you go for centralized or decentralized?
Well, iTech Media, even though it might seem like an agency, it works with just one client. So we basically manage the end-to-end process for those products, which means that it's not like a typical agency type of work. So we don't get to make this choice, basically, if that makes sense. So imagine like you own, I don't know, like 100 sites and you optimize them end to end. So in that case, it's not like a choice of, okay, which model do I apply? In general, if I was working for a typical standard agency, I would definitely look at their structure, have a chat with their teams, and try to understand which model will do the best job. Just to give an understanding, say, Paddy Power Betfair, we used to work in a centralized way, but then it shifted normally towards a decentralized one. And that's just because when you have mature teams, it will just get natural because there's too many other stakeholders and projects involved that you need to embed the experimentation within the squads, within the team. Otherwise, there's always going to be like clashing between the CRO activity and the products, unless you're very good at keeping obviously communication and everybody aligned.
So, what are the biggest challenges that you see when going from that centralized to decentralized on the client side? What are their biggest challenges on doing this?
Well, first of all, you need to start with the evangelization of CRO, and you need to get everybody in squads basically happy and excited about experimentation. And this is sometimes a long process. Until you work in a centralized way, everybody is aware of what experimentation is, why you need to run experiments, and how to do it. But then when you start doing this at the squad level or a tribe level or a company-wide level, then you need people to understand experimentation. And it's a process that takes time to get everybody to the same level or a very good level of experimentation knowledge.
Do you guys have like exercises for people involved, or how do you approach this?
Yes. First of all, we now try to involve everybody since day one when there is a project that involves A/B testing. Being in squads, that's actually very, I would say, easier than when you work in a centralized model. So we try to get everybody involved since the first steps. And this helps in getting their buy-in or getting their ideas or their feedback on stuff. And we try to work as much as we can as a one single entity towards every project, experimentation included. So there's a continuous stream of activities that we try to put in place to make sure that everybody knows about experimentation. And my take is that you need to take a different approach depending on the chapter. Say developers, if you have to talk to front-end developers about experimentation, you need to tailor the communication to that you're talking to, because they're all interested in different aspects of the experimentation activity. So you need to be more effective, I would say you need to treat them as obviously separate entities and then get everybody up to speed with the experimentation program.
Okay, so basically you need to do personalization, but internally for the people that you work with.
Exactly.
Okay, so are there any things that you see that continuously need effort in this? I mean, you're going to do this transition from centralized to decentralized. Hopefully you get everyone trained and used to working like that. But are there things that continuously need efforts to keep this rolling?
Yes. Well, first of all, sharing learnings is something that helps in keeping everybody hooked to the experimentation train, because when you see results of your job, you get purpose of what you do and why A/B testing is very important. Also, being, I would say, cutting edge in as much as you can, obviously, in the activities that you do is important as well, because it excites people at what they do. So, for instance, we are now migrating most of the products to server-side testing, and this is something that for developers was very important. It improved a lot their workflow. It's way more interesting from a coding perspective. It gives them more flexibility, and this is something that helps. Same with designers, like when you start working on projects that are more interesting or they involve like the latest trends and stuff, you will obviously get them more interested in the experimentation activity. There's a lot of things that you need to keep up and put in place, but at the end of the day, like what we really want to achieve is that everybody thinks experimentation, and this is all towards that goal.
Okay, nice. So, and looking forward, what are the things you guys are working on for the next 12 months? What are you looking forward to change or optimize? What are you working on right now?
So yeah, as I mentioned, we are migrating most of the sites, at least the most important ones, towards server-side testing, which is an interesting project. And then I would say for us,
interesting as in
interesting project because, when you go server-side, there's a lot of back-end involved, and we have multiple websites or multiple CDNs. So every site basically has a different setup. So there's a lot of people involved. It's an interesting project. There's a lot to learn from that. And then I would say the usage of data is something that we need to improve because, again, when you go into a decentralized model, then you need more or less everybody to think in an experimentation way. So using the data, both qualitative and quantitative type of research that you have to come up with ideas or to analyze tests. So this is something that I really hope that in the next 12 months will improve. So it will get us closer to the hybrid model that we want to achieve. And I think that's pretty much the top 2 points and obviously more tests, but that's valid for almost everybody. Yeah.
So, but how do you do this? How do you unlock the data? What kind of tools do you use that everyone in the company has insights in customer behavior?
Yes. So first of all, you need to make the tools accessible to everybody. And this is something that we already did. So everybody can access the data. But then you need to train people and you need to try to explain to them what's the most effective way to use the data. Because if you are a data savvy person, you might even want to spend 1 hour in front of your laptop or more to just drilling down to the data and trying to find what you're looking for. But if you are a chapter that is a bit more, let's say, less data savvy, or you're not that interested into digging into the data, then you need to provide them with the right infrastructure to get what they want in a quick way. And this is why building the right dashboards or telling them exactly what to find and where to find it, it's very important because they will learn this way and they will get more hungry for data the more they use it, basically.
Yeah. Are there any well-known tools you use for this, or is it all
Yes, yeah. We use SessionCam for visitor recordings. We use Adobe Analytics for the analytics, but then we got a lot of other data that comes from our database and the rest of it. So we are trying to join basically all the data sources and to manipulate the data so that it will be easily accessible to everybody.
Thanks so much for sharing all of this with us, Andrea. So my final question for you, do you have any tips on books that you'd like to tip to our audience?
So there's a couple of books that one actually it's almost done, I've read it, but there's a new one that I got recently. It's called Experimentation Works from Stefan Corvi.
Let me see.
Well?
Experimentation Works. This one.
That's it. There you go.
There we go. Fanboys, yes.
And then there's another one that I've almost read it all, which is from Georgi Georgiev. It's called Statistical Methods for Online A/B Testing.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because when I started, there was not much about the online, about the way you can analyze A/B tests. So I got really interested in that and doing a lot of research and stuff. But then this book came out, and it's a very good book to start learning more about the statistics behind A/B testing.
So it probably has a chapter of frequentist versus Bayesian.
Yes, well, there's a lot of stuff in there, but it's very interesting.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing. We will definitely add those books in the show notes, so everyone can find them. Thanks so much. Good luck with what you do and helping your client with the transition and staying in the course. Talk to you soon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.